Hey everyone, welcome back. This video is going to be part one of a two-part series where I create a fantasy portfolio with Three.js and Blender. Now this part is completely optional because in the second part I'm going to be providing you assets with the GLB files and the image textures that you need to use. But if you want to know how to create your own, that's what this video is for. Basically, I model some of the stuff and then we go through baking and some optimization techniques so you can create your own assets for Three.js rather than using my assets. I haven't determined the final design yet, but I'm still releasing this because it covers all the concepts that you need to create your own assets for Three.js anyway. So when part two comes out, the layout might be a little bit different. There might be more models here and so on and so forth. So, I'll let you know when that comes out, and I hope to get that out before the end of the year. So this is kind of fairly basic right now, but it should be enough to get you started if you want to create your own models. If you have any questions, again, leave them in the comments below or feel free to email me. You can check the GitHub repo for the Blender file and all the assets that we create for the end of this video. So before watching this video, you should be familiar with the basics of Blender. And that's all you need to know. Let's get into the video. Hello everyone. So I'm in a new Blender file here, and on the bottom left here you can see the keys that I'm pressing. Now there is one small caveat here. If I add a cube, just to show you, if I hit G to move and then Y to lock it on the Y axis, it's not going to show that I pressed the Y key unless I just press it by itself for some reason. So not all the keys show up here, and if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below, leave a timestamp, and I'll tell you what hotkey I'm using. So let me delete that. First thing I'm going to do is add a cube. So I'm going to, a cylinder, Shift A, M, Y to add a cylinder, and I'm going to leave it at 32 vertices. Now, if you can get away with lower amounts of polygons or lower amounts of vertices, you should definitely go for that. But, since our entire scene is going to be pretty low poly, it's not going to affect much for us. Additionally, just because you have a lower amount of vertices doesn't mean your scene is going to perform better. For example, if you have a really bad texture in a small scene, it's going to perform worse than a big scene, with like 6 million vertices that have actually good, optimization. So, but the general rule of thumb is, the less amount of polygons you have, the better, because that'll make a smaller file size and that'll reduce loading times. But, again, for us, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to leave it at 32. Now I'm just going to select my cylinder, enter edit mode with tab, and then I'm just going to scale it up as Z to lock it on the Z axis. And then I'm just going to add a bunch of loop cuts and scale them up, to kind of get a tower shape basically. And, I can also go into face select, hit E to extrude, and then S just to scale it down, and so on and so forth until I kind of get a shape that I like. And I'm also going to be using Alt, to select the entire loops really easily. And I'm just going to keep on doing this until I get something that I like. And yeah, nothing too interesting here. I'll see you on the other side. Alright, so I have my bases complete. You can see here they're just a bunch of cylinders with loop cuts and so on. And I also added them to a new collection, and I just named my biggest one base. But you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to hit A to select everything, which is just my bases. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to do Shade Auto Smooth. Now also make sure to hit Control A and apply your scale to make sure nothing is bugging out. And if you want, certain things to have hard edges, you can just, if you go into Object Data Properties, and you can just hover over this to read what that does. But basically it determines, what angle are going to be smooth. Here you can see it's like a 90-degree thing here. So if I change this to like 100, for example, you can see the 90-degree angles are now going to start smoothing. Now, one really neat trick is if all your stuff is kind of the same, you can select all of them. If you hold down the Alt key and adjust this, it's going to adjust it for all of your meshes. So you can see here I'm at 91.7, and I was this is the only one that was the active object that I was adjusting. Yeah, so neat little trick there to help save you some time if you want to copy all of those over for all your objects. Okay, now I kind of want to work on the stone cap thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. I'm going to go and face select, Shift D, duplicate, right click, cancel, P separate by selection. This becomes its own mesh right on top of that, which is exactly what I want. I want to go into edit mode, tab A, E, and then A to select everything, and then E, I'm just going to extrude that out. I'm going to hit E again one more time. I'm going to go into face select. I'm going to hit Alt, select everything here, Alt E, extrude along normals, and I'm going to hold down Shift so it's not as fast when I move my mouse. So kind of like that. Then I'm going to select this face. I'm just going to scale it down until I get a thickness that I like. And then I'm going to delete those faces. Then I want to fill out this gap here because, it looked kind of weird to see like a paper thin stone wall. So what I'm going to do is go into edge select with 2, and I'm going to alt select that. I'm going to make sure face project is on. And this will just snap to the closest face that you select on. You can toggle it, but I like to hold Control, and that will toggle it on and off. So if I do if I do E, I'm extruding, and then I'm gonna Z on the Z axis. I'm gonna hit Control, and it's gonna snap to that face that I'm on. And you can see it's denoted by that little red circle there that you see there. And now I'm gonna do S Shift Z. And there's one issue: the origin is from the original mesh that we had. So what I can do is right click, set origin to geometry, or you can just do right click OO, which is what I do, and that's a lot faster than manual clicking. S Shift Z to scale it along the Y and X axis, but not the Z axis. Now I don't like the Z index fighting here, and that's because there's overlapping faces. So I'm just going to select it, and I'm going to delete the face. And now we have an issue here on the bottom. You can see that, it would look kind of awkward if we were viewing from the bottom. We can see through the stone. So what we can do is go into local view. I'm going to hit 2 on my numpad, Shift Alt to select this, Shift Alt to select this. I'm going to hit Alt F, and then I'm going to go into face select, right click, and I'm going to go to tries to quads. And now you can see we have a mesh here that's perfectly in quads, and that's our ring there. Okay, next I kind of want to start the roof, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go here, I'm going to select this, Shift D, P, separate by selection, GZ, bring it up, and then I'm just going to scale it up. Whoops, I don't like that. Right click, OO, set origin to the center, S Shift Z, bring it up, A to select everything, E to extrude. I'm going to E to extrude one more time, and then I'm just going to hit S to scale that down. And I'm going to add a loop cut here, and then I'm just going to scale that in to kind of give that little bent, stylized effect. And then I'm just going to, keep on extruding and scaling down. And I'm just going to keep on adjusting it until I get something like GZ. Maybe add a loop cut here, and then I need to apply my scale. Then I can hit Control B, and then I'm going to use my mouse wheel to scroll up and add 3 bevel cuts. And then I'm just going to select the first one, the middle loop, and I'm going to turn on proportional editing, which you can also just toggle with O, and it's going to be on smooth for now, but you can try some of these other ones. And I'm going to go into side view. I'm going to go into wireframe for this one. I'm going to hit O to toggle it. I'm going to hit scale it down, and I'm going to use my middle mouse button to kind of adjust the smoothing, the range of the area of effect basically, and you can just see what it does there. If you ever feel like it's too sharp somewhere, for example here it kind of looks sharp, you can always just add a bevel there, some bevels there. So I'm going to add some here, and you can see it kind of smooths it out. And of course you can always manually adjust it, or if you don't like bevels, you can always just use loop cuts instead, which at this case is kind of just the same exact thing as a bevel on one of these. And if you accidentally add too many loop cuts that you don't need, you can always just hit Alt, hold down Alt, select one, Control X to dissolve it, or you can X and then do dissolve edges instead, but I just use Control X, and that does it a lot better. It's just the hotkey for that. Okay, now let's work on our cap for our top. So what I'm going to do is select this. I don't want to duplicate this because I'm just going to use it as its own separate mesh. So I'm going to P, separate by selection. Now it's its own mesh. I'm just going to scale it up. Whoops, right click, OO, set origin to the geometry. I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same exact thing I did last time, A, E to select everything. I'm going to E again. I'm just going to scale that in, E again, scale that in. And then I want to apply my scale so the inset is fine, although it doesn't matter for circular faces. Then I'm going to hit I to inset that face to make something smaller, and then I'm just going to hit E to extrude that, and I hit I'm just going to scale that down with S. And since it's really small, I think what we can do is just go into wireframe, select all those vertices, hit M, and click merge at center, and that's going to merge all the vertices into one vertice, so we don't have all those vertices. Although that might look a little bit weird. Yeah, I don't like how sharp it is, so I'm going to actually leave it with all the vertices there. I'm going to hit Control Z, and now you can see it's not all merged, but you know, it's very, very small, and that I feel like that looks a little bit better than having it completely merged into one point. I think the next thing I want to do is I want to put the little, what do you call it? The little wooden things that kind of spin around. So what I'm going to do is go into an orthographic view with numpad 3. I'm just going to shift right click somewhere to move my cursor, shift A M P to add a plane. And since I'm here, it's going to be on the y axis, so RY90. And that's just going to get it into that view here. And actually it doesn't really matter, but I like doing it in wireframe. And I'm just going to GY and move this, and I'm just going to E and just kind of outline a shape that I like. And of course, you know, I'm going to be turning on smooth proportional editing with O, and I'm just going to be adjusting the shape like so. And I'm going to be turning it off when I don't want it. And I'm just going to be editing like so. And I can also do the same thing like we did last time. I can use Control B to bevel instead of using just loop cuts, but it's kind of the same thing. Of course, you can also scale. You can also move one specific one. I don't think I need to do that. And I want these to be, I think I want them to be aligned. So I'm going to select these. I'm going to do SY0, and this is going to center them along the Y. I'm actually going to move it slightly, a little bit, GY, just a little bit. Maybe this one as well, SY0. That looks, actually, I don't like that. I'm just going to leave it curved, because why not? Okay, then I'm just going to hit A. Let's go back and solid. A to select everything, and I'm just going to E to extrude that out a little bit. And there we have our pole there. Then we're going to right click, and you can see the, you know, the low poly edges. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to do shade auto smooth. And again, if you still have some ridges that are, you know, below 90 degrees, because we don't want to smooth the 90-degree edges, but we do want to smooth some of the other ones, but I don't have any of those issues, so that's completely fine. You can adjust the auto smooth there as usual. So I'm going to apply my scale, and the last thing I want is add a bevel. So it's not completely sharp on the edges. Nothing in real life is completely sharp, so we want to give it a little more realism there. So I'm going to add a bevel modifier B, and I'm going to turn up the segments to maybe 2 or so, and I'm going to just adjust the amount until I get something I like. So that looks a little bit better. You know, it's up to you how stylized you want it to go. You can add more segments. You can change the amount of bevel. And now you can see it looks a little more stylized. Now, if you're a more advanced Blender user, you will notice that the shading is messed up on these sides. So what you can do is add a weighted modifier. So I'm going to go here and add a weighted normal modifier. And now you can see the shading is fixed. It doesn't look that weird, but actually it doesn't really matter for us. I'm actually going to get rid of it. All right, I'm going to go back into side view. I'm just going to bring this down, and I'm just going to, you know, I'm just going to put it, you know, to basically connect and further refine it with my mesh. Actually, I should have done this first, you know, without doing it by hand, but you know, whatever. Too late now. All right, so let's align this to the side. So I'm going to go into top view, and I'm just going to go into wireframe. Then I'm going to just do GX and get it on the corner here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to select here, and I'm going to shift S cursor to selected, and I'm just going to add a cube. Sorry, I need to be in edit mode, and I'm just going to add a cube here. So I'm going to shift A, and I'm going to add a cube, and I'm just going to scale it down, and this will be kind of the little pole here. And then I'm going to do GY. Of course, you know, you might be on a different axis from me, so just make sure that. And if you want to select the entire cube, you can just like select, you know, one face and then do Control L, and this will be kind of the mini pole there. And since the face is inside here, I can delete this because remember, we don't want those extra polygons in there. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm just going to select this, Control L or L, and I'm going to Shift D and right click, separate by selection. Oh, sorry, not separated by selection, just cancel movement and bring it up. And then here, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to move it out, and I'm just going to scale it up. S, Shift Y to scale it on everything except the Y. Okay, now what I want to do is make this rotate around the entire castle. So since this has an origin point in the center, remember we did right click OO to get it into the center of that mesh. I'm going to use this as the reference. So I'm going to do Shift S, cursor to selected, it'll snap to that cursor. That origin point there. I'm going to Shift A and add an empty, and I'll just do plain axes. Then I'm going to select this, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to set its origin to the 3D cursor, which is right there, which is you know, the origin point of this. and that's also going to be the origin point of our axes as well. So now you can see the origin point of this is over there. Then I'm going to add an array modifier, and I'm going to turn up the count to 8, or however many you want. And I'm going to change the relative offset to 0, and I'm going to activate object offset, and I'm going to select the object as my empty here. And it's still not working. So what we need to do is apply a scale, and then we need to apply our rotation as well. And now you still can't see anything because they're overlapping. So now we can select our empty and we can just rotate. So I'm going to go into top view here, wireframe, and I'm just going to RZ and rotate there until I get something that I like. Now, one issue is if you move this up and down, you're going to get like a spiral sort of effect. And this can be useful for many cases, but for us, it's not. So what I'm going to do is add one more empty. It doesn't really matter which empty. Usually it's common to use a sphere or another cube. But I'm going to use a sphere here. And what I'm going to do is select this, and then select this. So this is going to be the active object, the sphere. I'm going to do Control P, and that'll set the parent to that object. So now whenever I move this, it's going to move the empty that I can move. And it's also going to move the mesh as well. Now, if you want to, you can apply this stuff and you don't need the extra empties, but I'm just going to keep the modifiers. I don't like applying modifiers until the end because I want to make adjustments sometimes. If you ever want to adjust these, it's going to update on all of them, as you can see here, which is really cool. Additionally, the other benefit is that you can reuse it. So if I select everything here, usually I go into wireframe just to make sure I select everything, but everything's in frame, so it doesn't really matter. Shift D, duplicate, G to move it, S to scale. You can see I can just reuse my castle here. And the other benefit is that I can reuse it for, let's say I want to reuse the same thing for this. All I have to do is select my stuff. I'm actually just going to click here, hit period on my numpad key to jump to it, and then I'm going to hold shift to select everything in between the two selections. And then I'm going to select this, hold down shift, and this will become the active object. Shift S, cursor to active, that's going to set it to the origin in the center there. And then I'm going to cancel, I'm going to make this the active object again, hold down control and deselect that one with box select, click and drag. And then I'm just going to do Shift S, and I'm going to do cursor to selected, selection to cursor, and keep the offset there. And now you can see I'm around here. And of course, if you want to over adjust it, you can go into edit mode and you can select that one, and then you can just move it and adjust it there. And of course, if you want to rotate it, you can select your circle empty and so on and so forth. And you can also select your axes to adjust it as well. And that's also really helpful there. Okay, let's work on the cap a little more. So what I'm going to do is select this, and I'm going to select this, Shift D, duplicate, right click, cancel, P, separate by selection. And I'm just going to scale it up here so I can get a ring around there to a size that I like. That looks good. I'm going to enter edit mode, face select, and I'm going to inset this until it touches around here to go there. I'm just going to hit X and delete that face because I don't need it. I'm just going to go into edit mode, A to select everything, and then just E and Z to move that up, and just scale that down a little bit, until I get something I like. Then I'm going to Shift D, duplicate this, and move it down here as well. And I'm going to SZ just to make it a little more thin. And then I don't want it to protrude across these. So what I'm going to do is go into face select, hold down Alt, select this loop, hit Alt S, and that's going to scale it along the normals instead. And I'm just going to hold shift so it's not as fast and just bring that in there. And there we have our rings for this. And I think that's pretty much it for the tops. I'm going to be finishing the tops for the other ones, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, let's make some rings for the base now. So I'm just going to select my base, Control R, scroll up for 2 loop cuts to add a loop cut, and just SZ scale to get like a thickness that I like. And I'm going to Alt select this, Shift D, duplicate, right click, cancel, P, separate by selection. And I'm going to select that. So I'm going to select that mesh, that ring that we created. I'm going to Alt E along the normals and just bring that up a little bit. And I'm going to go back to this base. Let's go back into solid. And since we don't need these anymore, I'm going to Control X to dissolve those. And less polygons, the better. And since I'm here, I think what I can do is go into logo view, hold Alt, delete those, and just delete those faces right now. And, do it for these other ones as well if you didn't. Of course, you can always leave that step to the end. And I'm just going to adjust this until I get it, some way that I like. Okay, I'm going to start connecting the rings that we have. So I'm just going to select these make sure they're all selected, and I'm going to hit Control J to join them. And the active object's origin is going to be the origin for all of them now, but it doesn't really matter because you can always just change that. And now I just kind of want to bridge them, so I'm just going to select two faces with the same amount of vertices and right click and press B, or bridge faces, and you can see it kind of just connects that. And then I can use like a loop cut and you know, kind of just adjust it how I want it, you know, so on and so forth, and just do the basic operations that you want. You can go wireframe, select that, and G, and move it, you know, wherever you want. Here as well, so I'm just going to add a bevel. And it doesn't seem to be working. I think it's because I separated this and then I never rejoined it. So what I'm going to do is just merge by distance because it's overlapping. So that's what I'm just going to do. And yeah, now it works on the bevel, and I'm just going to adjust this to the same thing that I did over here. Actually, what I'm just going to do is select this, Control L, and then copy modifiers, and it's going to copy the modifiers to whatever that one had. And I'm just going to get rid of the array one by exiting out. So, and oh, I should have applied my scale first, but I feel like it's already good, so it doesn't really matter. And it didn't change the bevel, so it must have had a scale of 1. And there we have our little ring. I do want to add some extra supports. So what I'm going to do is go into edit mode, and I'm just going to select this ring right here. I'm going to shift deduplicate, right click cancel, P separated by selection. And it's really hard to select. So what I like to do is go into wireframe. And for some reason, when you go into wireframe and click twice, Blender will like automatically detect that you want the other thing and not the thing that you're clicking. So that's kind of what I do quite frequently. And yeah, I'm just going to select this, and we're going to Alt S to scale along the normals. And that looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to select this loop here. Whoops, I don't want that one. Fill that in to get that block there. I think I can also use Alt and it'll do the same thing. But yeah, so now, yeah, and then I want to do the same thing on the side. So I'm going to select these. I'm going to do Alt S, and I'm just going to scale it down a little bit. Cool, so there are our supports. And then, you know, we already know what to do to make it spin around. Now I want to cut a little hole out of this. So what I'm going to do is select this, Shift S, and I'm going to do cursor to selected since the origin point is in the middle. So I can add a cube here. I'm just going to Shift A, MC to add a cube, bring it up. And I'm just going to scale it. You know, you can scale it to however big you want it to be. And obviously I want to pull it out a little bit. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to apply my scale. And I'm going to select these edges. I'm going to hit Control B. Whoops, not that one. So I'm going to hit Control to deselect that. Shift, select that. And then I'm going to hit Control B to bevel it. And I'm going to use my middle mouse button to add as many cuts that I want. And I think that will be good enough. And you can also adjust that here, the number of segments, the width, and the type of, you know, the type of thing that you want. You can also go into a custom, and you can see when you go to custom, you can give it like a custom shape over there. And this is like really helpful when you're making like pillars and stuff and you're like beveling 4 corners. And it's also really cool to make like custom frames and stuff like that. And there's some resources out there that show you some cool custom ones that you can do, but I'm just going to leave it as the default. And yeah, that's going to be good enough for me. I'm going to go out, and what I like to do is go into edit preferences and check mark this. This should come by default in Blender, so it's a Blender add-on just to make sure to implement that, and it makes cutting things out a lot faster than having to add a Boolean modifier. And now what you can do is select your cutting out object and the object that you want to cut out of, and just hit Control- on your numpad, and it's going to cut it out for you just like that without having to add the modifier if you want. In this case, I'm actually going to be applying the modifier this time because I want to clean up some of the topology. You can see, you know, some of the topology is messed up after cutting it out. So what I'm going to do is now delete that cube since I no longer need it. Then I'm going to go into edit mode and kind of just polish it up. So I'm not going to spend too much time because it's, you know, it's more of an advanced Blender thing. And there's a really simple way to fix this without, you know, being skilled at Blender. So the first thing I'm going to do is just Control R and add a loop cut here. And then I'm going to add hit K on my keyboard and just click, and that will give a slice between there. And you can see that I already cleaned up the topology there. And if I do the same thing down here, you can see there's like hard lines here. So what I'm going to do are add a loop cut, just bring it somewhere here, and then I'm going to hit K for the knife tool, and I'm just going to cut across like this. And you can see the topology is kind of cleared up a little bit. You can see there's still sort of like a hard line here. So what I can do is do the same thing. Now, this isn't best practice, but it's a really quick solution, and I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to cut through here, and you can see it cleared up there. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to Control R loop cut, and right click to cancel the movement so it's perfectly in the center, and then I'm just going to K and cut to the vertices. And if you want to see how bad it really is, what you can do is come up in here, and in viewport shading, you can change to a matte cap that you like. I think this one's pretty popular, but I'm just going to stick with this. But I also want to turn on cavity, and basically it will just, show you the dips and cracks a little bit better. And you can see I can see them a lot easier now. What I'm going to do is just select this, Control X to dissolve it, and you can see that's gone. Same with here. I'm going to do this and Control X and dissolve that. Then now I get like a slight line there, so I think what I'm going to do is select this vertice knife tool and just cut over here, and that might work because it'll break it out a little bit. And yeah, it actually does. So, I didn't even know if that was going to work or not. So what I'm going to do is do the same thing here. I'm just going to cut over to this vertice. And yeah, that fixes up there. Same thing here. I'm going to Control X to get rid of that. And it looks like I don't actually have to fix anything. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Control X, dissolve those edges. And there, the topology is pretty much fixed. It is slightly bent, but I think when we go into rendered view, no one's going to notice. So we pretty much cleared up the topology. I mean, this is not good topology, but we cleared it up. So, for some reason, it looks like it's not smoothing this, even though it already has smooth shading. So I'll just right click and shade auto smooth again. And it also looks like I accidentally selected the back face of the cube when I was beveling it, so it also beveled the back side instead of just the corners. Up here, it looks like I didn't do that, so whoops, my mistake. I'm not going to change that though because I'm too lazy to do that. So I'm just going to hit Control, and yeah, I'm just going to select those, and I'm going to do X delete faces. And then I'm going to go into ring. I'm going to hit Alt, whoops. I'm going to hit Alt to select this loop. And since I'm on the Y-axis, I'm going to go to the side. Let's just look this in wireframe. I'm just going to do SY0, and this will just align them. And this fixes it because, I got rid of the bevel on the bottom that I accidentally didn't. If you didn't bevel that, you didn't need to perform the fix that I just did right there. If we need to fix the topology, I'll be doing it later in the video, but, right now, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I'm a developer. I don't like fixing things unless they're broken. Anyway, what I do want to do is highlight this like so, and I'm going to add that to a vertex group so I can easily select it and move it up and down, right? GZ, and just move it up and down, right? So what I'm going to do is come into object data properties right here, and I'm going to go into vertex groups and just add one. I'm just going to call it and just assign it. So now I can deselect it and select it really easily. It's probably a good time to add some lighting to the world just to, see our stuff. So I'm going to go into render. I'm going to go to cycles, GPU compute, if you have a good GPU. Cycles for the realistic lighting. And, I'm going to enable some noise threshold. I'm going to leave this at 128. If your computer can't handle it, you can turn it down in the viewport. And I'm also going to check on denoise. This also takes, more work for your computer. So if your computer can't handle it, just uncheck it. Then go into the world properties, and I'm going to go into the color. I'm going to add a sky texture instead. Let's go into rendered view. And you can see how cool that looks. The other thing I also want to add is a sun. But before I do that, I want to go to preferences and make sure sun position is enabled. And this allows the sky texture to match with the sun object that we add. So if I do Shift A and add a light and add a sun, if I go now down into sun position, I can select my sun object here, and I can select my sky texture that I just created. And now it's going to map to the sun. In the old version of Blender, if you rotated the sun, it would adjust the sky texture as well. But for some reason in the new version, it's not working like that. But you do have other options here that you can play with the sun, and the sun will update there. You also have some presets here that are nice, so you can just select them and see if they look good for your scene or not, and that's kind of nice there. You also have a bunch of other options here. You can change the air, the dust, and you can see how that affects things. The sun's rotation, the elevation, the intensity, the size of the sun. And one of the coolest things I really like about it is that you can change like the time of the sun as well. And that's like really cool, like what kind of time you want and the time zone and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah, so just play around with the lighting and have fun. I'm going to be adjusting it throughout the video, so I'm not going to spend too much time right now on it. So since we added some lighting, we might as well add some basic materials first. And it's really simple to create a material. So I'm just going to call this light gray. If you want like a nice stylized thing, all you have to do is just turn up the roughness to 1 and it'll look good. Like, let me just click on this and I'll just call this roof. And again, I'm just going to turn up the roughness and I'm just going to change this to like red or something. And you can see it really looks pretty decent just like that. You can also turn down the specular, which helps sometimes. And let's say I want to create another one called wood. And I'm gonna do the same exact thing. And I'm just gonna like choose a brownish somewhere. Since we're just adding them and replacing them later, I'm just gonna select these and select this. I'm gonna do Control L. I'm gonna do link materials. And it will just copy the material from the active object to those. And I forgot to select this one, so I'm gonna do that as well. This is actually really interesting. The light is so bright on the top that it's actually almost completely changing that color. If I change like latitude or something, it's gonna like adjust it, and then that's what it's gonna look like when the sun is over there instead of directly on top. So those are like my initial materials that I'm gonna be using. I'm gonna be changing them later, but you can see them. All of them are just random colors that I selected with the specular turned down and the roughness turned up, and I didn't touch anything else on here. And you can see it already looks pretty decent for what it is. And if your scene is a little bit larger for some reason, and you can just hit Control Spacebar and it'll maximize that specific viewport, and you can always just go back by hitting Control Spacebar again. And there's also a thing here called back to previous, and you can do this on anything. So if you hover over here and do Control Spacebar, it's going to maximize that. Control Spacebar to go back, Control Spacebar here, or back to previous and Control Spacebar there. So what I like to do sometimes is to keep another viewport open with the rendered view or the material preview view while I'm modeling on. So if you come to one of the edges and you just click and drag, when you see the little square sign there or the crosshair, you can just click and drag and pull out a new view and it'll give you another view. So here, this is going to be my rendered view over here on the left. I'm just going to keep it there while I model here, and you can see it's going to have that split screen. If you don't like that, you can create one of these other tabs and leave it in like rendered view. So every time you go back there, it would be like rendered, and it'll go to rendered view. All right, let's make some windows. I'm just going to go into front view. I'm just going to shift right click MC to add a cube somewhere. And I don't really care about the shape. I mean, I don't really care about the size that much because we can always just change that. I just care about the shape right now. And SY, again, that doesn't really matter either, but oh, it's kind of bothering me. All right, let's do Shift A and apply scale so the bevel works properly. And actually, I'm going to go into local view for this. And I'm just going to Control B, and I'm going to scroll mouse up to get that many loop cuts. And if your things are going through, make sure you hit C, and it'll clamp the things so it won't, the bevels, so it won't go through each other. And if you hit C again, it's going to go through again. So just hit C and keep it in there. And I'm going to right click Shade Auto Smooth. There's like a sharp edge there, so I wonder if I turn this up, it's not going to get rid of it. It might be because the vertices are overlapping. So let's just select and do merge by distance. And I merged 2. Yeah, so it was just because when we were beveling, this side had 2 vertices and this side had 2 vertices. So there was 4 vertices even though we only saw 2. And when I merged them, it fixed that harsh line there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. And I don't want as sharp of a bevel there. And that's why I didn't do all 4 corners at the same time. But obviously it's up to you how you want, your window to look. I think that's good enough. So what I'm going to do is hit I to inset this. And then I'm going to hit E, and it should lock automatically on the local Z axis, so you shouldn't have to change that. And I'm just going to bring it in how deep I want it to go. And now I want some wood planks, so what I'm going to do is, let's select this. I'm going to Shift D and bring that up. And then I'm just going to hit E and extrude that to a thickness that I like. And since this face is going to be snapping here, we're not going to need it, so I'm going to do delete faces there. And I'm just going to select, I'm going to select this loop instead. and make sure you have face project snapping on, turn on. Then you can again GX, since I'm on the x-axis here, hold down control to toggle the snapping, or you can just activate it manually and I'll snap to that side. And same thing I'm gonna do here. I'm just gonna control R, add 2 loop cuts, SX, scale that down to the center somewhere. And I'm just going to E extrude this out, snap it to the top. I'm gonna do the same thing down here. I'm gonna E, whoops, GZ, and snap it to the bottom there. And I'm gonna delete the face after I do that. Same thing here. I don't want that face. And this one might need another loop cut. So I'm gonna loop cut here. I'm gonna go wireframe, and let's select this vertex, and I'm going to change this to vertex select. I'm going to do GZ and just snap it up there. And now we have a perfect looking window like that. And of course, if it's too forward, you can just select these. And what you can do is come into object data properties. Whoops. So yeah, right here. And you can add a face mask to this. Face map, sorry. Add to it. And with this selected, you can hit assign. Now you can deselect and select this really easily, so you don't have to manually select it each time. And I'm just going to do GY and push it in a little bit, so it's not protruding the same size. Obviously, it's going to depend on you. And you know, since we don't need those back faces anymore, I'm going to select those for all of them. Oops. So yeah, I got the back there. I got the back there. I'm going to delete those faces. So I added some materials to it, and it looks, you know, it looks okay, but it could be a little nicer because everything else kind of is thick with bevels, and I added a bevel to this, and it kind of looks weird. So what I'm going to do is go into edit mode. I'm going to go back into materials. I'm going to deselect everything by just clicking somewhere, and I'm going to select the wood. I'm going to hit Alt S, and I'm just going to hold Shift so it's a little more precise, and I'm going to hit S again to make it scale a little more evenly. And I just want it a little more thick. And now you can see it looks a little more thick, it looks a little more stylized, which is kind of what I was kind of going for. If you want to make it even more stylized, maybe you can add like a loop cut here and like kind of just, you know, GXX, local Z x-axis, and kind of, you know, put a curve here like so, GXX. So once you apply the modifiers, each of them are going to be separate, so you can like manually update them so not all of the windows look exactly the same and get it a little more realistic. But I'm going to leave these sort of detail sort of things to the end, and I'm just going to keep it as long as it looks, you know, it looks all right. So I'm just going to keep it as is for now. All right, it's about time to make our propellers. So there's a lot of ways to make propellers. I'm going to show you probably the simplest way, and you can get a lot of good results. So I'm just going to go into top view. I'm going to Shift A, M, and add a plane. And, you know, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. There's really no method. You kind of just get a shape of a blade that you want, you know, and you know, just, you know, whatever you want to do. Honestly, you just add loop cuts, you just move vertices, you know, kind of get the general shape that you want of a blade, of a fan blade. When you're done with it, you can use Control, or I guess on Mac it might be Command, I'm not sure. And then you can hit one of the numbers on your key, and it will automatically put a subdivision service modifier with that number of cuts there, with that number of subdivisions there. So if I do Control 2, you can see it's going to go to 2, Control 1 is going to go there. And I'm going to be adding Control 3. So if you apply that, you can see it just, you know, subdivides the mesh a lot, adds a bunch of vertices so it smooths it out. So then after that, you can add a simple deform modifier, and then you can just change this down, you know, until how you like it. And obviously, if you're at different axes, you can go like X and Y and play around with those. And yeah, and then I guess you can just edit it, you know, how you want it. And so, you know, it kind of just is what it is. Add loop cuts. Other alternative to making a propeller is just to do the same exact thing, right? And, you know, I'm just going to extrude this out. By the way, you can also extrude with Control right click. I don't know if you prefer that. I don't use this that often, but, you know, sometimes it's faster than E and moving your mouse. Yeah, so same thing. You add a subdivision service, and you can also turn it off in edit mode if you want to. So here's edit mode. And now you can see when I go into edit mode, it doesn't show that. Now you kind of just do the same thing. Usually I use like proportional editing. So when I move vertices, you know, it's going to affect the other ones. and I'm just gonna, kind of shape how I want my propeller, basically. So that's the other way. This is the other way to make a propeller. You can manually do it. But there is one caveat to this method. If you change your origin point, this is going to update according to your origin point, and this is why you can select the origin that you have. So for example, if I go here and I want my origin point to be here and I move here, you can see my blade is now completely slanted to the right, and it's a different sort of twist. There's a different sort of bend there. But to avoid this, you can apply the modifier first with Control A and then adjust your origin point later. So I got something I like, and I'm just going to do exactly that. I'm going to apply this, and now I'm just going to make it spin around, using the method that we used several times, that I used for this, that I used for this. All right, let's make a staircase. So I'm just going to shift right click MC for a cube, and then I'm just going to shape it to however I want it. And it doesn't really matter because you can always just change it later. And this time, since it's slightly different, I'm going to show that method again. So I'm just going to shift right click somewhere, and I'm going to add an empty. I'm just going to add a plain axis. And then I'm going to give this an array modifier. I think last time I just set this to 0, but you can just check off. You can just turn it off instead. So that's better. And I'm just going to turn on this again, and I'm going to select my plain axis, my empty there. And of course I need to apply my rotation and scale. And then I need to adjust the origin point, of course. So what I'm going to do is Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I'm going to do here set origin to 3D cursor, and now they're overlapping again. And here's where moving it will be really helpful. So I'm going to turn up the count to like 5, and I'm just going to spin it RZ, and then I'm just going to move it down. And you can see we have our kind of staircase there. And if you want, you can edit it. So you can go into like wireframe, and you can just bring this out a little bit here and then bring these in. So you can get like a more spiral staircase, like, kind of up to how you want to do it, if you want. And yeah, so there we have our spiral staircase, basically. Alright, so I made my staircase here, and I also added some wooden boxes here. These are just cylinders with an inset and a slightly inclined inset. So I just want to talk about, like, if you wanted to edit something like this, it'll be scaling around the center of all the objects by default. You can see bounding box center. So what you can do is change to individual origins, and now when you scale them, it's gonna only scale along each object's individual origins and not the center of all the objects. Started making a boat, and I just learned this from Animated Boat Tutorial by Polygon Runaway, who's a pretty famous YouTuber and 3D artist in Blender community. But I'm just gonna show it here anyway, so you don't have to leave and look up the video as well. So the first thing I'm gonna do is add a plane, and I'm just gonna extrude it out 5 times, so to make 6 vertices. And it doesn't really matter the size because you can always change it later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then here I'm just going to add a loop cut, right click cancel, go into top view, select these vertices and delete those. Then I'm going to add a mirror modifier. And since I'm along the x-axis, I'm going to be having the x-axis here. I'm going to turn on clipping so the vertices don't go through each other, like here. So I'm going to turn that on, and now it's not going to go through each other. Alright, so once you get a shape that you like, what I want to do is, well, let's merge these first, so that doesn't matter. So yeah, okay, I removed one vertex. And then I'm going to hit Shift Alt, and it'll select the loop for me, and then hold down Shift and add that. And I'm just going to E extrude and lock it on the Z-axis. And I'm going to scale it on the X-axis, and then a little bit on the Y-axis. And like Polygon Runaway does, I'm going to move this a little bit forward. So I'm going to do GY and just move that up. Alright, so let's add a layer to the bottom. So what I'm going to do is come down here, and these are actually going to mess up our inset. So I'm going to Control X to dissolve them, and also make sure to apply your scale. And now I can inset this properly. And you can see up here there's this thing called boundary B. You can see it's up there. And if we hit B, we're now going to be scaling like this instead, and that'll look nice. And then we can just do, whoops, sorry, not E. We can just do GZ and move it down, and then we have a little boat shape there. Okay, and now we want to split up each of these rings, so to speak, so we can create them into planks easily. So what I'm going to do is add a loop cut here, and this will just give another layer of plank basically. So I'm just going to right click there, and now Now I'm going to hold down Alt and select the loop, and I'm going to do P separate by selection, and I'm just going to do that for every single layer. So now select this one, P separate by selection, and finally this one, P separate by selection, and now we have 3 different layers of planks here. Alright, so now we can do what we call rip vertices. So if you highlight a vertice and hit V, it's going to rip it from that. So essentially then it becomes like its own thing, it's not connected anymore. So this is really helpful. So what I'm going to do is everywhere that I want like a plank, I'm going to rip that from the other area. So here, for example, I'm going to select these two, and I'm going to hit V, and those are going to rip those 2 vertices. And I'm going to select these 2, and I'm going to hit V, and I'm going to rip those 2 vertices as well. So now I'm going to essentially have a plank here, and a plank here. So I can also delete this. I can also separate this a little bit, more vertices. So since I already did the one here, I'm going to rip these vertices instead. So we just have, a length of 1 plank here, and then this one is a length of 1, this one's a length of 2, and so on and so forth. Here, now I can rip this one instead, and so we have a length of 2, and this one's going to be offset from there, and this is going to be the same thing for the bottom here. Alright, now what you can do is select all of these, go into edit mode, hit A to select everything, and face select, and then hit Alt E, extrude along normals, and then you can just hold shift to make it more precise. Areas that we ripped at, we have those holes, and that's really cool because that's exactly what we're looking for. And we can do Alt S, to scale along the normals to make it a little more offset, a little more random if you want to. But, I don't think it matters too much. Yeah, so there you pretty much have your ship already. And I'm just going to do Control J to join it back. There's going to be my ship. I'm going to shift right click, shade auto smooth. I'm going to add a bevel modifier, and I'm going to turn that up to 2. I'm going to apply my scale, and I think that'll be it for that. So there is my build right there. Okay, so now I want to add a single vertice. So if you come to edit preferences, make sure you have extra objects ticked on in order to add a single vertice. So I'm just going to shift right click where I want my sail mast to stay. I'm going to shift A, mesh, and then you can see now there's a single vertice, and you can just add that single vertice to your scene. And I'm going to go into local view for this, and I'm going to wireframe, and make sure you are in vertice select, otherwise it won't work. And I'm just going to scale it up like so. And about where I want to extrude another vertice, I'm going to leave that for the horizontal one, and then I'm just going to do it again for the height that I want, and I'm going to go back out of local view just to see, if that's like a good height that I want. Of course, you can always change it later. And I'm going to select this, and I'm just going to E and then lock it on the Y-axis, and that'll be my back sail. To get something that you like, what you can do is do right click, convert to, and then convert to curve. And now you have curve options here. You can see those popped up. And then you can go into the geometry tab, and then with round selected, you can add some depth to it. Alright, and I'm just going to increase my depth until I get a thickness that I like. That looks good enough to me. So I'm going to just, now I'm going to convert it to a mesh. So F3, and I'm just going to do convert to mesh. So now it becomes its own mesh. Now there is a slight issue here. It looks like, these didn't really align. And you can spend time fixing that if you want to. So yeah, I'm actually just going to do that. And I think I'm just going to merge these. So I'm going to hit M, and I'm going to merge at last, and I'll merge it to the second last one, to the second one that I selected last, basically. So I'm going to select this, and then merge L at last, or ML. Yeah. All right. So there we kind of cleaned that up. All right. Time for the sail. I'm just going to go into side view. Doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to shift A, add a plane, and then I'm going to rotate RY90. Let's go into wireframe. And I'm just going to merge these. Let's merge at last like usual. So we have a triangle, and I'm just going to shape it to match my stuff. Now we want to bend the sail. So what we can do, we can't add loop cuts because it's not a quad, and those only cut through quads. So what we have to do is manually create with the knife tool, make a cut somewhere near the top. And it doesn't matter how precise it is, but I'm going to lock it on the y-axis. I'm going to hit enter to confirm. Now when I hit Control R, you can see I can add loop cuts, and I'm just going to add like that many, and then maybe one here, maybe one here. You know, it's kind of up to you. See, this isn't going to bend that much, so it doesn't matter, but if you want, you can add another cut there manually and move it. And then I'm just going to select this, and I'm going to turn on proportional editing, GX, and just kind of bend my sail. And of course, you know, it doesn't matter if it goes out because you can just readjust it later, right, in solid view. And I don't want it to be completely thin, so what I'm going to do, you can just Alt-E and extrude along normals, and it'll do the same thing. But you can also add a solidify modifier, which essentially does the same thing. So sometimes it will be easier to use solidify modifier. And it looks a little bit weird because I turned on shade smooth, but let's do shade auto smooth. And yeah, so with this active, I'm just going to do Control L and copy modifiers as usual. So this one also has some thickness, and you can adjust the thickness of the sail. And I don't want it too thick, but you know, I do want some sort of thickness there. All right, let's make a little adjustment here. Everything else is kind of round and this is like square. It's kind of bothering me a little bit. I could, you know, make another one and cut out a thing, but I don't think that would look good either. I think I just need to make like a slight modification here. So I'm just gonna go into solid view. I'm just gonna select this knife tool and I'm gonna hit A to lock it, and I'm just gonna hit enter, click there. And I'm just gonna select this edge, and I think I'm just gonna bring it up to get a little bit something like that. And let's go into wireframe, and maybe let's select these. I don't want to select anything in back, so I'm going to hit Control to get rid of those. Just kind of bring this out, and I think I want to bring these down a little bit, so make sure I select those, and let's make sure I select these. I don't want anything in the back. Let's go into solid, and I'm just going to bring those down a little bit. Yeah, and now you can see it kind of gives it a cooler vibe, you know, like this instead of what it used to be. So now I want to add some clouds, and there's a really cute and easy way to make clouds. So if I just shift right click and come down to meatball here and add a ball, you can see it's basically going to add a ball thing here. And if you want, you can adjust it a little bit, you know, just like any other mesh. And depending on your resolution, the lower it is, the higher number of vertices it's going to be. So you can see when I turn this down to like 0.05, it's going to be extremely smooth. Okay, I think 0.1 looks good for me, so I'm going to do that. And now all you have to do is just Shift D and move it around and then scale it like so. And if you want, you can scale the other ones. And I'm just going to Shift D and duplicate that as well. And you know, you can just adjust your cloud. And you can see you already have an extremely cute cloud here, you know, just like that. And if I go into render mode, look how, oh my gosh, that, you know, that cloud is so cute. Oh my god, which is actually so awesome. You can parent it to an empty so you can adjust it later, or you can just convert it to a mesh right now. So I hit F3 and I did convert to mesh, and there now it's its own mesh. And you can see it's got a bunch of vertices. Topology isn't great, but it's not going to matter that much. I'm just going to merge by distance to get rid of any extra vertices. And you know, there we have pretty cool cloud. Really easy way to make some really nice and small, cute little clouds just like that. Oh my gosh, they're so cute actually. All right, now what I want to do is make sure I'm starting to, you know, get a feel for what it might look like in Three.js. So I'm gonna change the background. I'm not gonna change the lighting of the background, but I'm just gonna change the background. So what I'm gonna do is go to my shading tab, and by default, there should be a shader editor open here. And make sure you're on world. And then if you don't see anything, you can press home on your keyboard and it'll snap to the home basically. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift deduplicate this. I'm going to Shift A search for a mixed shader. And this way, I'm going to put this one on top and this one on bottom. And I'm going to do Control Shift and click on this, and it will automatically link that. Now what it's doing right now is mixing between our sky texture that we had and this grayish color, and that's why our lighting got significantly darker. And you can see when I completely turn it to 1, it's going to go all the way for this one, which is this, and if I turn it all back here, it's going to go back to this one, which is what I connected. So I'm going to leave it there for now. And to fix this issue, what we can do, actually let me maximize this, is add a light path thing here and plug in is camera ray. And now you can see when I go back, our entire background is this top one, but our lighting is actually from the sky texture. And you can see when I mute this with M, it's not going to change. The lighting doesn't change, but the background changes. So that's really cool there. Now I don't like the gray background, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a color ramp node, And this will just allow us to make a gradient, and I'm going to slop that in for the color instead. So it'll be a gradient. And then we need one more, we need a gradient texture, and that color is going to be in this factor. And then we can hit Control T on our keyboard and it'll add a mapping and texture node. I think you need to have a Node Wrangler add-on installed, which defaults come to Blender in order to have the Control T vector there. And then you can see right now it's like black here and black here. So we can rotate it by 90 degrees on here. And now you can see we have white up there and black down there pretty much. So now what we can do is select some colors. So I'm just going to select something kind of bluish for the bottom. You know, it's kind of up to you how you want it to be. And then I'm going to add another one here. And I'm going to make this a little bit purplish because why not? And you can kind of just get a feel for it. This is like a little too dark for me. Like a little too blue. And this is like a little too purple. So I can like tone it down a little bit. And then I don't like this white. I want to make this blue again. So I'm going to put that on some sort of tinted blue there. And you can see we have a really cool sky. Yeah, so this is mine if you want to take a look. And if you don't like how this is so up there and adjusting these aren't going to change that, what you can do instead is adjust the X on the mapping node, and you can see it's going to adjust that. And now when you adjust this, you know, it's going to kind of adjust. Okay, I think now's a good time to save a copy. So I'm just going to do file save copy. And, you know, you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it day one, but, you know, have your own naming convention. And this way, you know, when you start destroying things, when you start editing things, you'll always have a backup copy. And, you know, instead of, you know, duplicating things and just hiding them, you know, you have a completely separate file, you know, to mess around with. And this is what I like to do. I like to save copies often and so on and so forth. Now, of course, it's up to you. You know, if you don't have that much file space, then you can just duplicate objects and move it into a hidden collection. And so you'll always have some sort of backup. So I'm going to shift right click somewhere, shift A, M, Y, add a cylinder, and 12 vertices is fine. I'm just going to do RX90. And we can add loop cuts. I'm going to type 5 on my keyboard, or just hit 5, right click cancel, so I get a center one like this. And I'm going to go into wireframe. Let's go into a side view for this one. And with proportional editing on with O, shape that I want for my little balloon. And you can go into local view if it's kind of, you know, bugging you out. So I'm just going to scale it out. And I'm just going to select these faces and scale them down a little bit. So I'm going to do S, and then I'm going to turn off proportional editing, S, Shift Z, and just scale those down a little bit to kind of give it like a blimpy little rings around it. So I'm going to Shift Alt, Shift Alt, Shift Alt, whoops, Shift Alt, Shift Alt. And I'm going to Control B bevel these, like so, to a thickness that I like. I think that's okay. I'm going to Shift D, duplicate, right click, cancel, P, separate by selection. So we get like a ring around it. And then now what I'm going to do is select that thing, go into edit mode, AE, extrude along normals. And there we kind of have our ring around it. Cool, and there's our little ring. I actually don't like this one here. So what I'm going to do is just select a face, Control L, and then delete those faces. So I only have 3 instead. Okay, let's start adding some land blocks. So you can just shift right click anywhere, and I'm just going to add a cube. And the general idea of how I approach this for stylus stuff is just, you know, you kind of just extrude and you know, just select faces and kind of just extrude a general shape that you want. And you know, it doesn't really have to be that important, you know, as long as you get something. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give it a subdivision surface modifier, and you know, I'm going to add some loop cuts here and there just to give it some thickness if you want it a little more like so. And this is too round, so you can add a loop cut and then just bring it to the side and so forth. And you kind of just shape your landscape. So let's do shape shade smooth. And you know, it's really up to you how you want to do it. And it's not that big of a deal. So you can see here, I'm just going to add a loop cut there. It's like too round, so I want to add one there and one there, and so on and so forth. And once you kind of have like a shape that you want, of course, you can also turn on proportional editing and kind of bring these down and so on and so forth, and kind of adjust your landscape how you want it. There's really no right or wrong way, and sometimes, you know, when you're just playing around, you're going to get something that you like out of nowhere. If you get something you like, what I do is go into top view, face select these. I'm going to Shift deduplicate, right click, cancel, P, separate by selection, and this is going to be our top basically. And I'm going to do the same thing, tab A, Alt E along normals, and just scroll it up. And I don't want it to be, floating on top kind of like this. What I do is just I bend it over the thing a little bit, so I kind of like cover it up, if that makes sense. And if you start seeing some clipping in between the front, you can always just select the top one and just kind of move it up outside of the stuff. Landscape. Yeah, and there you can see, in just a few, like 2 minutes, we created a pretty cool landscape like that. All right, so I just added a bunch of islands around here that are going to hold the projects. And this is just a rectangle with an inset face and an extrude in. And over here, I did have some more stuff. And this is just a cylinder and then an inset face. And then I just selected every other face and then extruded it out. This just started as a cube with a bunch of loop cuts that I just shaped randomly. So now's the time to actually start putting on projects here. So if you want to, you can go into material preview if you want, but I like to stay in rendered just because. So what you can do is just add a new material in edit mode and assign it to this one. So you can call it like project 1. It's up to you what you want to name it and then assign it. So that's if you want your project to take up the whole billboard, but I don't want that to happen. So instead I'm going to undo that. I'm going to add a bunch of mini, rectangles on here to add pictures of my project. All right, so I just have a bunch of cubes here with project cube assigned to project 1. So now we can go up into the shading tab like we did before. Make sure you're in object. And by the way, if you are stuck on world and you can't go to object, make sure you don't have this pin on, because that won't change it if you go to object and world. All right. So if your computer is bad, you can stick with material preview for this part, but I like to stay in rendered. That's just a personal preference. It's completely up to you. Then for project 1's material, what I'm going to do is Shift A and then S to search, and then search for an image texture. So basically, we're just using an image and we're placing it onto this 3D object, and that's kind of all that is. And then you can just hook it up here. And it's going to be pink because it means this file doesn't exist or it's missing. But in our case, it just means that it's empty. So now you can navigate to any place on your computer. So here you can see I have a picture here, so I'm just going to click on it. It doesn't really matter the format, it's going to work. So PNG, I'm just going to click on that. And now you can see my image is appearing as a texture onto this cube, which is really cool. And the image is all completely messed up because Blender doesn't know how to map a 2D image to a 3D object, right? And this 3D world that we're viewing here, it's all based on math, right? Like our computer screen is still 2D, right? So it's all about math in order to create this simulated 3D world that we're seeing. And that's why we need to tell Blender how we can map this 2D image to this simulated 3D world that, behind the scenes is all about mathematical calculations. Luckily, Blender has the interface that people coded for us, so all we have to do is just use that tool instead of coming up with the mathematical formulas for ourselves. Blender will do all those mathematical projection calculations, behind the scenes. So this concept is actually called UV mapping, and basically it's like XY, except it's U and V. And you can pretty much think of it like, you wrapping a present or something, with like gift wrapping paper. The idea is, you have a 2D image that only has 2 dimensions and you're trying to project that onto a 3D object that has 3 coordinates, for example. And again, it's just a bunch of math. So if you don't have another window open here, remember you can just click and drag to make another one and click and hold to get rid of one. But I have another one here. And I'm going to go into UV editor. And this basically, is just the interface to tell Blender how to map the image texture to the 3D model. And what you can do is click over here. And if you already used the image that you want to, you can just select it. It should come here by default, but if it's not, you can just open and navigate to it. So now when I select this and go into edit mode and in face select this face, you're going to see it show up in the UV editor. So you can do similar things here if you want to, right? If you do rotate, you can see I'm rotating. So if I do R 180, you can see it's going to rotate 180 degrees. And you can see if I do like S to scale it, you can lock it on the Y axis. It's going to adjust it, how it wants it, how that's going to do. And if you run out of texture, it's just going to repeat itself. And you can change this behavior, but it's not going to matter for us because we're gonna not put the UV around, outside of the texture. Yeah, so that's kind of the basic idea of UV mapping. We just used a UV editor to tell Blender how to map a 2D image to a 3D object. Now, one problem with having so many project things here is that we would have to create a new material each time and open a new image for each one of these to map to. What I like to do is go into Figma, or you can use PowerPoint or whatever tool you want that can export images as a group or as a single image, and I just copy and pasted a bunch of random images here from Unsplash, and this is called a texture atlas basically. And what I'm going to do is just select all of them, Control G to group them, so now they act as one image, and I'm just going to export this entire thing as one image. Now come here, export. Again, format doesn't really matter for us, so it's kind of up to you, and I'm just going to export that and save it to my profile. Alright, I'm back in Blender, and I opened that image that I just exported, and you can see it's not mapped properly, so we can hit X here, and then open that image again so we can see it. It's going to be this one. And now we can just adjust our mapping for each one of these. So that's all you have to do. You can just start mapping to your images for each one of them. So that's what I'm just doing SY and G to move it, so on and so forth. And you can see we have that, and it's going a little bit over, so I don't want it to do that. Yeah, so I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of them. And again, you can, since it's going into this material, you can adjust some of the stuff. So it's a little faded because the lighting is hitting it really strongly. So you can like turn down the specular and turn up the roughness to make it a little brighter and kind of just adjust it how you want. I don't want it too saturated because then it kind of looks out of place for the stylized stuff. So, it's kind of up to you. Now, one last thing to think about when you select a thing, and if you accidentally have UV sync selection, what's going to happen is it's going to show you all the sides. So this face, for example, if I select that, it's going to show you it on here as well, instead of just the face that you select. So I'm going to leave that off for now. We might use that a little bit later, but for now, I'm just going to leave it off. So whatever face I click, that's the only UV for that specific face of that specific cube that I'm going to be, changing at a single time. Alright, so I mapped all my stuff, and I guess if you wanted it not to be affected by the lighting in the scene, what you can do is just replace it with an emission instead. So you can see if I hold Ctrl-Shift-T, click that, you can see it's going to be the exact colors here. It's not going to be affected by the world lighting. You might prefer that, but I'm just going to leave it here for now, and I might change that a little bit later. Additionally, you can also do the other Blender stuff that you want to adjust the image input. For example, if you do search for, let's say, like RGB curve, which is pretty common, I'm sure. If you've used like Photoshop or any video editing software before, you were kind of familiar with this. You can see as I change the brightness, it's going to adjust the image brightness. You can adjust the green values, the mid or green values. I'm oversaturating right now. And yeah, so that's that if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep it simple for this tutorial, and maybe in future videos we'll cover some more complex stuff. Yeah. Alright, okay, I'm back in the layout tab and it's ready to start optimizing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save a copy, because we're going to start doing a bunch of destructive work. And again, you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it day 2 because my other one was called day 1. Right, so what I'm first going to do is hit A to select everything and apply scale, so just to check and make sure nothing breaks. And if something breaks, it means one of your modifiers was determined based on your scale. But it seems like nothing has broken for me, so that's okay. And instead of applying all of these modifiers one by one, what you can do instead is just hit F3 on your keyboard and search for convert and convert to mesh and just select that. And it will apply all the modifiers for you. Alright, now it's time to start optimizing. So again, you want to delete the faces that won't be visible. So I don't think this will be, so I'll delete that. But again, if you're unsure, it's better not, it's better just to save time and just not delete it. Like here, you can see this one's obvious because no one will ever know those are empty. Some other ones, like here, I guess you could delete, these if you wanted to. Notice it all. So this one, for example, delete those faces. And I guess if you wanted to get this bevel, what you can do is Control plus on your numpad, and I'll just select the next set of faces basically. So I just hit this one, then Control plus, and just select that whole ring. It just expands your selection. And if you want to see statistics for your objects, you can actually come down here and view it. So when you go into edit mode, it'll show you 5,810 vertices. And if you don't see that, you can right click and click scene statistics, and that's what it'll show you there. Also come up here into viewport overlays and click statistics, and I'll show you the same information here. So for these faraway clouds, if your camera is only here, it's not going to be close to these at all. So there's no point of keeping them high poly if no one's going to notice. So what you can do, for example, I'll hit numpad to copy to this. You can see what it looks like, but we don't want all these polygons, right? So what we can do is add a Decimate modifier, and this will basically reduce the number of polygons we have. And it'll also make it look uglier, but again, since it's far away, it doesn't matter. You can just add it and then bring it down until it looks okay. And again, if you need to go far away just to see if it'll look ugly or not, you can do that. You can do the same thing. Select this, Control L, copy modifiers. And then when you're done, you can just hit A again, F3, convert to mesh. And again, it'll just apply the modifiers. And you can see after I optimized the faraway clouds, I dropped from 101,000 to 95,000, which is great. All right, it's time to now do some texture baking. And if you don't know what that is, it basically, very simplified, just means you're saving data into an image texture. So, this real-time lighting that I'm using in Blender right now that you see, that I can update with, the settings, that's all a bunch of mathematical calculations, and that's very, very performance intensive on your computer, right? That's why if you have a more expensive computer, it's going to run better. The idea with texture baking is instead of doing, all these calculated lighting information, bouncing stuff and all that other stuff to get this real-time rendering, instead you just save that information into an image. Now, one of the downsides of this approach is that, it's more work than just using real-time lighting in Three.js. But the upside is that, it's going to improve performance on someone's computer by a lot, because they don't have to calculate all those lighting calculations. So for example, we have this shadow here casted from here. Instead of just leaving this completely green like it would be and having the real-time lighting update for it, since it's completely static, we can just save that shadow as part of the material or as part of the texture right there instead of having to calculate the shadow. Now, one of the downsides about this is it only works for static scenes, right? Like if this was like moving left and right in your Three.js scene, the black shadow would just be static on the ground like here, while your object would be moving back and forth, and that would just kind of look awkward. Now, depending on your scene, it might not be much of a big deal. Like, let's say you have birds flying over these clouds, and normally, it would cast shadows onto here. But, since they're up here, most people aren't even going to tell that it would be able to cast shadows here anyway. So, it really kind of just depends on what you want to bake. Like, sometimes you only bake a little bit of it just to save on performances, but still use some real-time lighting. Sometimes you just go full baking. It really kind of depends on your use case. So here's like a really good example of a website that uses baking. This is site of the month on awards.com. And you can see nothing ever changes, right? The lighting doesn't change. Nothing is moving except the camera itself. So there's no reason to calculate all of these lighting information. And I'm not even sure Three.js can make something so realistic without a ton of extra effort. So the idea is you just bake it into a texture. You can see some of the sunbeams on here, on this image texture basically, are the sunbeams that you see here, right? Because we UV map the 2D image to the 3D image over here. I can just like switch through these and you can see kind of some of the sunbeams. All right, so let's create our own image texture that our 3D model can use for the browser. All right, so let's create our first image texture. I'm going to go into UV editing tab just because it's nice there for us already. And we can come over here to new and we're going to create a new image. Now, since we're creating an image, we can choose the width and height. And this is going to determine the quality of our image texture basically. we're all familiar with image resolution. If you have a very low resolution image, when you scale it up, it's going to be really blurry. But if you have a high resolution image, you can scale it up much higher before it starts becoming blurry. So usually 1K or 2K is fine, but 4K is also pretty popular. So what I'm just going to do is do 4K. The lower amounts of pixels that you have, or the lower resolution, the smaller the file size is going to be. So if you can get away with something smaller, you should totally do that, but I'm going to stick with 4K. So I'm just going to click and drag my left mouse button. I'm going to change this. You can just type ×4 and I'll multiply that by 4, and now we have a 4K texture. Uncheck alpha because we don't have anything transparent, and I'm going to check this, and this just gives it, a more diverse color range. So now how do we determine what do we want to put on this specific image texture? So you might think, oh, we can just unwrap everything and put all their UV maps here and then just bake that information right onto one single image texture. Now this would work, but the problem with that is, since we have so many objects, like this, for example, this cloud, it would just be, let's just imagine that's the map for the cloud that we're going to be baking the texture and the lighting information on this single image. But then we also have this hat here, and obviously you don't want them overlapping because this is going to be white. So it's going to be white after baking over here, and it's going to map to that white. But this is not white, right? It's a gradient. So this area is going to be a gradient after we bake it. You can have these UVs overlap. Now there are instances where you can have UVs unwrap, for example, right? Like if it's the same exact color and none of the shadows are being casted on it, you can have, as many overlapping as you want. All the objects are just going to map to that specific white area if you wanted that specific color. But for us, that's not happening because at each point of these, we have different shadows, we have different lighting, so we're not going to be overlapping any UVs. So the issue with putting all these objects into one texture is because all of them are going to be really, really small. And since we only have 4096 pixels, and since we only have this many pixels here and here, that means, let's say this cloud only has like, I don't know, I'll just make it up, but like 83 pixels. So you can imagine it'll be pretty blurry once we get close to it. This might be like 105 pixels, for example. Okay, so then you might just be asking, okay, why don't we just go to like an 8K texture? I think that's the math there. And yeah, so since we doubled it, well, this wouldn't be 105 anymore. This would be, 210. And, we doubled the pixels, so it won't be as blurry. Now, one problem with using really big textures like this is because of flexibility. First, it's easier to work with multiple textures. And there's also like loading issues with loading big textures at a single time in like iOS. So I don't think anyone uses 8K textures. So it's also much easier to manage a bunch of smaller ones than it is to manage one large one. Okay, so now we know we have to create multiple image textures, but how do we determine, what objects are going to go on what image texture? And there's really no right or wrong answer here. Sometimes it's just trial and error. And the more you do it, the more you kind of just get a good intuition to how you're going to split up your objects onto which textures. So I'll just share you my general thought process currently. So I have these here, and I want the images, since we're getting really close to the images, I want them to be really high resolution. And since all these other objects are pretty small compared to everything else that I'm adding, so I'm gonna create one image texture for all of these. And then I'm gonna create one image texture for all of these. And I think for the clouds and these extra islands is going to have another image texture. So that'll be 3 4K image textures. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to come over here and hit Alt S, and I'm going to save that image as something. And I'm going to save it into JPEG, but we can always change that later. And I'm going to turn up the quality to 100% because we're going to be compressing it later. And I'm just going to call this projects. And I'm going to save that image. Okay, so now what I want to do is go into wireframe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to join all of these. So it doesn't really matter which one's the active object. I'm just going to highlight this and I'm going to join them as a single object. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to join those. This here. The active object origin is going to be the new origin for the whole thing. So now it's going to act as one item. And this is actually an optimization technique as well, called draw calls, but that's a little advanced, so it doesn't really matter. But when I animate this, it's going to animate as one single object. So that's why I joined them together. And it also makes it easier when we add a second UV map. So if you go into rendered mode right now, you should see everything is still the same, even though we joined it. Now it's just acting as one object. And we can come down here and add a second UV map. So the idea here is you have one UV map that maps, your textures basically, which is what we did here, right? This is our first UV map. It was mapping to our image textures. And the second UV map is our baking map. So where that mapped image that we mapped with the first UV map is going to be baked on into the second image that we'll use into the browser. All right, so I'm gonna do the same thing for all of these. I'm just gonna hit plus and plus and plus. And you can see when I have this selected, if I hold shift and select these other ones, go into edit mode by hitting tab and hitting A to select everything, you're gonna see it's gonna show up all over here. Make sure they have the same name, otherwise they're not gonna be showing up. All of them are not gonna be showing up here. But since they have the same name, all of them have UV map 0.001, they're all gonna be showing here. Okay, so now what you can do is hit U. Make sure this is highlighted. You don't want to mess up your first one. So make sure you have this selected as all of them. I'm gonna hit U and then Smart UV Project. And then I'm just gonna leave the defaults and hit OK. And you can see Blender does a pretty good job at unwrapping for us. You can do manually unwrapping if you want to, but for us it's not necessary, so we can just do regular. Okay, so one thing you can do is when you're in here, you can hit A to select everything. You can come up to U and you can come into Pack Islands. And it'll try to, optimize your space a little bit better. And, Blender doesn't do it that well. So there's like an add-on that you can buy for $39. I highly recommend it, called UV Packmaster 3. And you can see how well it packs, it uses more of the texture than what Blender has here. We kind of have dead pixels here. Like we're still loading that image with, the file size there, but we're not using any of that space. So it's kind of a waste. Of course, what you can also do is, manually move your UVs, right? And try and scale them up to maximize the space. But honestly, that's just so much work sometimes. And I don't even bother most of the time. Oh, and here's where you might want to be selecting UV sync. So every time you select something here, it'll select over here and you can hit the period key to jump to your selection. Yeah, so this is pretty much good for what we have, but I'm just gonna use UV Packmaster because I want to, but you can just leave the other one. Okay, so now what we can do is bring up another panel here. Whoops, let me go to the edge. And this is going to be our shader editor. And since we're on these 4 objects, if we go to the material project, it's going to show us all the materials of our selected objects that we have. So we have the moss for the stone, the grass, and the wood for that, and the brown background for the billboard. And of course, project 1, which is one single image. So for each of these materials, you can think of them like containers. You have to add our image texture called projects in here. So what we can do, Shift A, search image texture, and you want to select projects. So select projects, and yours might still say untitled. You can just change the name here or close Blender and open projects, which is what we have here. And make sure this is selected and nothing else. And you can tell if it's selected with the white outline. And now what I'm going to do is just Control C and go through each one of these and just Control V and make sure that it's the active one. So for each of these materials, I'm just going to click copy and paste, Control V, make sure it's active, Control V, make sure it's active. So there is a few other steps we need to do before we bake, and that's going to be checking face orientation. So face orientation basically means which side is going to be baked. So it looks like everything for us is blue, which is good. But let me just show you, for example, if I hit Alt-N and flip this, you're going to see that's red. And you can see this is going to be here. So if we bake this right now, it's actually going to bake the other side of this flat face. So what will appear here is going to be completely black, right? Because inside there's no lighting, so it's going to be completely black. And this is probably one of the most common errors when you're in Three.js and you don't see something. It's likely because the face orientation is the wrong way. So Three.js thinks this is the side that is going to be viewable from and not this side. So you'll just basically see through it. So since everything for us on the outside is blue, that's going to be good for us. And I don't need to change anything, but if you do, you can just select the red ones, Alt-N flip, and you can use these other ones that are doing it automatically, which usually help sometimes. So if I do recalculate outside, you can see it's like, oh, everything is already outside, so I don't have to do that. So I'm going to turn that off, and let's go into render, and we should be able to bake. So I'm going to do cycles, supported, and GPU compute if you have one. All right, and then you can come down to bake, combined, which just means you're combining everything in the scene, like the lighting and everything. Now there's a bunch of other stuff you can bake, and they have their separate use cases, but they're a little more advanced. We're just going to be baking everything together. Hey, future me here. I forgot to mention, if your computer's taking a really long time to bake, you can change the noise threshold, or basically how blurry, some of these images are going to be, or you can change the max samples. Sometimes 64 is more than enough. I had it on 256 when I was baking. 128 is also pretty common, so play around with that as well. With everything selected here, or just these four here, I'm just going to click bake, and we should be good to go. So I finished baking, and you can see we have our images here baked on there that we're going to be mapping to. So what I'm going to do now is hit Alt-S, and that just saves the image basically. And make sure you save that, and you can see I saved there. You can also do Alt-Shift-S if you want to save it as WebP or something else, but again, we're going to be changing that later, so it doesn't really matter for us. Now, if you want to take a look at how well it's doing, you can go to, I guess, one of these materials. Let's just do project 1, and what I'm going to do is just Shift-A search for a emission. And I'm going to come up here. I'm going to put in color through here. And I'm going to put surface in here. Now, instead of using the project image that we created earlier, that we created in Figma, we are now using the baked texture that we just created. It's still not working because if we go into data object properties, this is the one that's rendered right now. So we have to switch to this one. If we switch to this one, you can see, oh, hey, now it works. And it looks actually pretty good. Yeah, and this is what it'll look like in the browser pretty much, right? So it looks pretty good. It might be a little blurry for your tastes if the camera gets too close, but if the camera stays over here, I guess it's not too bad. And of course, these you also have to change to this one if you want to see this one, again, because it's using the map. It's using the second map. The first map, which is what we used initially, and the second map is the one that we baked with. Yeah, I'm going to go back to this one, and I'm going to switch back to the rendered for both of these. So what I like to do is I'm just going to select these original ones, and I'm going to Shift deduplicate, and then I'm going to move them to a new collection called Baked. And since all four of these are in a collection called Projects, I'm just going to hide those. And then in Baked, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of their UV maps. So I'm going to get rid of the first one for all of them. I'm also going to get rid of all the materials for all of them. So I'm just going to get rid of them. And the reason this works is because we have a UV map. So when we export the baked ones and attach this image to this has the data pointing to somewhere on this map, right? And it'll just attach that texture later. So I'm going to actually hide the baked ones and re-enable the project ones. And the reason you want to enable the original ones is because their color might interact with something else in your scene when you render. Like for example, if this was over here, you know, the green of the grass would be casting some green on the boat. So when you bake this area, you'd still want that there. For us, it doesn't matter because these projects are by themselves. So we actually can hide the projects as well. Okay, so for this one, I think actually what we can do here is delete all the empties because we already converted them into their own mesh. So what I'm going to do is just select one of the empties and just click the top one, hold shift, select the bottom one, and just hit X and delete those. And nothing should be breaking. Actually, what I can do is just search for empty and just select all of them like so and just delete them like that. And yeah, everything should still be fine. So actually, instead of joining the objects, since I'm going to be rotating these here, RZ, like so, I'm actually going to be joining these instead. So I'm going to join these and they'll act as one object, but I'm not going to join it with anything else. So maybe I also want to set the origin to geometry. It's not a big deal because it was down here and it's not going to be moving up and down just in circles. So it didn't really matter if we changed the origin there or not. And same thing over here. I'm going to join these. I'm going to go Control D, right, OO. Right. So, and technically the center piece, no one can even tell if that's rotating because it's completely identical 360 degrees. So, but you know, whatever. I'm just going to join it anyway. So same thing here, Control J. All right, so I'm just going to select those and move it into a new collection, and I'm just going to call those blades, but you know, call it whatever you want. And I'm just going to temporarily hide that, and I'm going to go into wireframe, and I'm going to select everything else. So whoops, and then I'm going to hold Control and deselect that. And yeah, so I think that's good enough. I'm just going to Control J and join that. Go into render view. Yeah, everything should be good to go. Okay, so let's go back and re-show the blades. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to be clicking on this one and I'm going to add a UV map, and same thing with this one. Same thing with the blades. I'm going to select this. I'm going to give it a UV map, select this one, give it a second one right here. All right, so like usual, let's go into wireframe. I'm going to select everything here. Oh, and I'm selecting my sun, but I don't want to, so I'm just going to GX move that. You can also come up here and activate the deselect. And if you click this, you know, it won't be selectable anymore. So that's nice. And I'm just going to select these. Oops, not this. And again, I'm going to hit X here to get rid of this image, and I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to call this towers, or whatever you want to call it. And same thing, times 4. Uncheck alpha because nothing we have is transparent, and then more color range for 32-bit. Alt S to save that. Towers. Just gonna save it as JPEG because the other one is JPEG. Save as image, and that's a lot of materials, but you know, that's why there's add-ons like Simple Bake for Blender, which I actually have, and it's like, I think it's like $8. It's totally worth it. It makes baking in Blender so much easier. You should definitely buy it. But you know, since it's paid, I'm not going to be using that for this video. So same thing here. I'm just going to search for an image texture, and I'm going to open Towers JPEG, copy and paste it in each one of these, and make sure it's the active one. And if you already pasted an image texture like we had last time, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure the new one that we're baking on is, you know, the active one. Okay, now that all the things are there, what we can go now is tab and edit mode, A to select everything, and U and smart UV project, and hit OK. Okay, so before we bake, ignore this image here, I messed up. Before we bake, again, we want to check for face orientation. I keep forgetting this step, and I've done this 1,000 times. And you can see the bars out here are red, which is not what we want. So I'll just do Alt-N, and I'll do recalculate outside. Hopefully this helps. Yeah, and that does it all for us. Everything outside is blue, which is nice. Here we're definitely going to be seeing the inside. So what I'm going to do is hit Alt and select this loop. And I'm going to hit Shift Alt and select this loop, and this loop, and this loop. Let's make sure, whoops, let me make sure I'm getting these horizontal ones. And I think I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom. So let me get this. Oops. Shift Alt. Oh no, I have to like kind of go at an angle here. So let me just go to the bottom. Shift Alt, yeah, Shift. Okay, yeah, so I don't think we're gonna look up there, so there's no need to get those. I'm gonna Shift deduplicate this, right click cancel. I'm just gonna scale it S Shift Z, just to scale it on the Y and X axis, just a little bit in. And then I'm going to select one, Control L, and then do Alt N flip. So now we have a double layered face basically. We have an additional, face here, and it's gonna be blue here and red on the other side. So there's two reds facing each other. Okay. And here I think I actually have the same issue. I'm just gonna Control L. I'm gonna select these two, Control L, and I'm gonna do Alt E extrude along normals and just bring those up there. So now we want to select everything. So I'm just gonna select everything again. And I need to apply my scale because I was scaling that inside thing. So now we can do it again, Smart UV Project. Okay. And I'm going to use UV Packmaster again. And it packed it pretty well. And since we pasted all those towers now, we can have the same exact settings as I did last time. And we should be good to bake. And I'm actually kind of scared how this looks because we put so much stuff on one image texture. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to turn off face orientation, Shift deduplicate, right click cancel. I'm going to move this into a new collection called towers. I'm going to temporarily hide that just to see. And these are going to be our baked ones. So go into here. I'm going to get rid of the first UV map for this, first UV map for this, and the first UV map for this. And I'm going to get rid of the UV map for that as well. And I'm going to get rid of all the materials for these. And I'm going to give it a new material. And I'm just going to call it Tower Baked. Let's open this up. Let's go into the home. Shift A search, image texture. Delete this with X. Shift A search, emission. Color, surface, open, towers. And we want to do the same thing with these. So I'm just going to select these. Control L, link materials. Now it's not going to look exactly like this in Three.js, but you can get a general insight to it. So now that I'm looking at the texture here, I definitely noticed that we put too much for sure on one texture because, the details that I had on the wood are completely missing. And yeah, those black outlines are normal, by the way, because they're overlapping, and it's just how the rendered thing works. Again, you can see some issues here with the texture, and you can actually change this. So if you want to, you can select this, go into period key. So what you can do is adjust the UV itself to get rid of, the line if you wanted to, but this might lead to some other kind of distortions, but we'll see. It might not, it might make it look awkward. And you can see it actually kind of cleared up the line there. Instead of adjusting the UV mapping itself, is you can adjust the image texture itself. You have the clone stamp tool if you're familiar with that, but basically it just takes a sample from one area of the image and copies it to somewhere else. And you can see I'm just painting over that and it's going away. So now, since the map is still here, it's just going to paint there, but it's, the line is no longer gone. So you don't have to use Photoshop. You can use several other image editing softwares. That's just another alternative. Obviously Photoshop, you can do a lot of other things. You can like paint on here if you wanted to paint some patterns that are, just easier to do in Photoshop. You can do some color correction, so much that you can do to the image itself instead of having to adjust the model. Okay, yeah, so regardless, we put too much on one image texture. So what I would do is put everything except this big one onto a separate image texture, and then the big one is going to be on its own texture, and that would make two more. All right, then the easy way just to select these two here, just hit Control I to select the rest of the stuff on the scene, Control J to join them, and again, you can repeat the baking process from there. So now I'm going to go into wireframe. I'm going to export these as one of their GLB files. And I'm going to remember export settings so we don't have to keep doing this. Selected objects only. transform, we're going to leave that. Data, we don't need shape keys, we don't need skinning. And if we open mesh, we don't need normals or vertex colors, but we do need UVs. And we want to check on compression, and we don't have any animations associated with it, so we can turn that off as well. And for materials, we don't want any export materials because we already have our image textures that we're going to be applying later. All right, so I'm just going to export that, and I'll call this projects. And then I'm going to do the same thing for these, so those. And remember, these are not joined together. These are their separate objects. So like so, and then I'll just do the same thing, file, export, GLTF, and I'll call this tower. I'm going to hold shift and select these, control I again to invert your selection, which just selects everything else. And I'm just going to do file, export, GLTF, and I'll call this extras. Cool, so we have 3 GLB files and 3 image textures. And I should mention one final thing about compositing in Blender. For example, if your image texture, for example, come up to use nodes. If your image texture, for example, has some noise on it, Blender actually has a denoiser here that you can use instead. And let's mute this. And let's do Shift A search for an image. And you can open one of your textures and put it in here. I don't think we have much noise, but if you do have noise, you can get rid of it like this. And you can put image to image and then image over here. Now, one thing you do have to change here is change this to the resolution. So it's going to be 4096. And then you can just hit F12 on your keyboard to give it a nice render. So here it is. And one downside of denoising your textures is you're going to lose some of the details, but your texture won't be as grainy basically. Create the background that we created in Blender, and we want to use that as a cube map for our Three.js scene. So what I'm going to do is hide everything. And I'm just going to Shift S, cursor to world origin, Shift A, and add a camera. I'm going to hit Alt G, Alt R, and this is going to reset the rotation on everything, and I'll do RX in 90 degrees. Then I'm going to change this into paranormic, and I'm going to change this to equirectangular, or however you pronounce that. And then we can go into render properties now, and sorry, it's right here. And we want 2048, and then by 1024. And I guess you can change this to 200%, which will just double this. And then let's go back into our compositing tab if you did the denoise step. And we want to go back to this. We can just delete these. And then let's go back into layout, and we should be good to go just by hitting F12. So there we have it, and I'm going to hit Alt S, and I'm going to save this as a Radiance HDRI. Okay, so now that we're done, what we have here are 3 image textures, one for each of our GLB files that we exported. I have an extra one here because I was just showing you if you wanted to denoise it, and an HDRI that we are going to now convert into a cube map that we can use in Three.js to act as a background. So here's my file. I'm going to upload it here, and you can take a look at what it looks like in the cube map, which is nice. I'm going to save that, and this is the format that we want to use in Three.js. So I'm going to select this one. All right, so those are going to be our usage for the cube map in Three.js. Now, these are really big in the file size. You can see this is 16 megabytes. So the next and final step is to go to squoosh.app and upload your image textures here and basically compress them. So here, oh, this is kind of the noise that I was talking about. You can see how grainy it is. So if you put it through the denoiser in Blender, it's going to get rid of those. But you'll lose some details. So MozJPEG works pretty well for me. You can also use WebP if you have transparent data, like if you had the alpha channel on. On the right here is going to be your compressed image, and on the left here is going to be your original image. So you can adjust the quality depending on how messed it up it is. And the funny thing is, sometimes when you're compressing your image, it's actually going to reduce some of the noise itself, as you can see. So it really kind of just depends on what quality you're kind of going for. And I feel like 1.3 megabytes is good enough, so I'm just going to download that. And yeah, just repeat it for all these other ones that you have here. Technically, you could do it for the cube map as well, but they're only 5 kilobytes, if I recall correctly. They're only 3 kilobytes, so you don't actually have to touch these. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for all this video. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, or feel free to email me. As usual, thanks so much for watching, take care, and I hope to see you in my next video.